There are moments in life when you think everything around you is stable, safe, and secure, until one shocking discovery turns your entire world upside down. Imagine walking into your mailbox, pulling out a stack of letters, and buried between utility bills and junk mail, you find a letter claiming that your home, the place you've poured your heart, soul, and savings into, is suddenly being reviewed for sale. And not just any sale, it's being pushed by none other than your very own HOA president. That's how it started for me. One simple envelope, one piece of paper, and suddenly the ground beneath my feet felt like it was cracking open. The idea that someone, especially the person elected to protect the neighborhood, would try to take my property and sell it for profit, it was unthinkable. But when it comes to power-hungry people who believe they're untouchable, nothing is off limits. And I was about to find out just how far one man would go to line his own pockets. The HOA president had always been a slick talker. On the surface, he came across as polished, professional, the type of man who knew every detail about bylaws and neighborhood rules. He strutted around like he owned the community, and in a way he acted like he did. For years, homeowners grumbled about him, but no one ever pushed back too hard. Why? Because most of us assumed the HOA only had so much power. Annoying fines, ridiculous landscaping demands, constant warnings about where to park, that was their game. But what I was about to uncover would prove that the president had been playing a much darker one all along. At first, I thought the letter was some sort of clerical error, maybe a mistake in records, maybe an outdated notice that wasn't even meant for me. But then I looked closer. My name was on it. My address was correct. And more chilling than anything, it had his signature. The HOA president had apparently authorized transfer of ownership documents, which implied that my property was already being marketed to potential buyers. I can't even describe the wave of emotions that hit me. Confusion, anger, disbelief, followed almost immediately by fear. How could anyone just sell my home without me? What kind of scam was this? And if he had paperwork, did that mean he'd forged something? The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't a random mistake. This was intentional. Someone had targeted me, and the man leading my neighborhood was behind it. In the days that followed, I began piecing together what was happening. Neighbors whispered about strange visits from realtors walking around my property, taking photos like it was on the market. One neighbor even mentioned seeing a couple being shown around by the HOA president himself. That was when it really sank in. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a clerical slip. This was a calculated attempt to take my property away from me and profit from it. The more I dug, the uglier it got. Public records showed nothing had officially been filed, which gave me a small sigh of relief. But the president had been spreading the word privately, trying to attract shady buyers willing to skip the paperwork until later. Essentially, he was attempting to cash out on my home using forged authorization. And if I hadn't caught on early, there's no telling how far it could have gone. But here's the thing about people like him. They think they're smarter than everyone else. They think no one will dare question them. He must have believed I would be too intimidated, too confused, or too trusting to fight back. And maybe that's how he'd gotten away with smaller scams in the past. But he made one critical mistake this time. He picked the wrong homeowner. I decided then and there that I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I wasn't just going to sit back and hope it all disappeared. I was going to gather every piece of evidence I could, document everything, and prepare to bring him down. And the first step was confronting the documents themselves. I needed to see them up close. I went to the HOA office, pretending to ask about routine community paperwork. Sure enough, buried in a folder with my address on it were documents with forged signatures, my supposed approval for the sale, written in handwriting that wasn't mine, with fake notarization stamps. It was bold, it was sloppy, and it was criminal. But I couldn't just grab the papers and run. I needed proof, and I needed it handled the right way. So I photographed everything discreetly, making sure every detail was visible. The signatures, the stamps, the fake authorizations, it was all there. And as I walked out of that office, my heart was pounding. I knew I was holding the smoking gun. Still, I had no idea just how deep this was going to go. I thought I was uncovering a single scam, one desperate attempt by a greedy president. But what I was really about to expose was a pattern of corruption that had been going on for years. And once the police got involved, the entire community would never look at him the same way again. But at that moment, standing outside with my evidence tucked safely away, I knew one thing for sure. This fight had only just begun. And the HOA president? He had no idea the storm that was about to hit him. If Chapter 1 of this nightmare was discovering the forged documents, Chapter 2 was about unleashing them into the hands of people who could actually take action. I had proof, I had motive, and I had the determination to bring this scam into the light. But even as I prepared to fight, I couldn't shake the unease in my stomach. Taking down the HOA president wasn't going to be simple. People like him don't just roll over. They fight, they manipulate, and they do everything they can to protect their power. I started by organizing everything I had. Photos of the forged signatures, snapshots of the fake notarization stamps, the letters I received, and notes from neighbors who had seen suspicious activity around my property. I built a timeline: when the letter arrived, when neighbors spotted buyers, and when I saw the forged paperwork in the HOA office. I wanted everything airtight, because I knew the president would deny it all. He'd probably claim it was a misunderstanding, a clerical error, or even try to pin it on someone else. The next step was going to the police, and let me tell you, walking into that station felt surreal. I wasn't just filing a noise complaint about a loud neighbor or reporting a stolen package. I was accusing the elected leader of my entire neighborhood of a full-blown real estate scam. I half expected the officers to laugh, to tell me it sounded far-fetched. But once I laid out the evidence, their expressions changed. Suddenly, the weight of what I'd uncovered became crystal clear. Forgery, fraud, attempted theft of property. These weren't minor infractions. These were serious crimes, crimes that could ruin lives, careers, and reputations. And in this case, crimes that could send a man straight to prison. The officers didn't dismiss me. Instead, they asked for copies of everything. They explained that they would need to open a formal investigation, interview witnesses, and obtain the original documents from the HOA office through a warrant. It was going to take time, but they reassured me that my evidence was strong, stronger than most people ever have when they first walk in. Leaving the station, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Relief because the wheels of justice were finally in motion. Anxiety because I knew the president wasn't going to sit back quietly. Word would get around, and when it did, the man who thought he controlled everything was going to realize someone was finally challenging him. And that's exactly when the strange things started happening. First, I noticed cars idling near my property late at night. Unfamiliar vehicles, parked just long enough to make me uneasy. Then came the letters, anonymous notes slipped under my door with vague warnings like, "Be careful who you accuse," and "Not everything is as it seems." They were clearly meant to scare me, to make me back down. But instead, they just fueled my determination. Because if the president wasn't guilty, why go to such lengths to intimidate me? The police worked quietly but thoroughly. They interviewed neighbors who confirmed seeing the president with potential buyers, walking them around my property as if he owned it. They dug into the notarization stamps and quickly discovered they were fakes, not registered with any legitimate office. They even traced some of the supposed buyers who revealed that the president had pitched them off-market deals on properties he claimed he could sell privately. My home wasn't the only one. He'd been fishing, targeting other residents, but my case was the one with undeniable evidence. Every time the police uncovered a new layer, it was like watching a thread unravel. The clean, polished image the president had built for years was coming apart, stitch by stitch. He wasn't just a greedy neighbor. He was a career con man, hiding behind the shield of the HOA, using his position to intimidate, manipulate, and profit. The tension in the neighborhood grew heavier with each passing week. Some residents avoided me, scared of being dragged into the mess. Others quietly thanked me, whispering their relief that someone was finally standing up to him. Rumors swirled. Was the president going to resign or double down and fight? Nobody knew for sure, but one thing was certain. The community's faith in him was crumbling. And then came the breaking point. One crisp morning, I got a call from the police. They had executed a search warrant on the HOA office. Inside, they found multiple files with falsified homeowner signatures, fake authorizations, and even drafts of sales agreements for properties that were never on the market. My case was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. This wasn't an isolated scam. It was a full-blown operation. The president was taken in for questioning, and while he initially denied everything, the evidence was overwhelming. The forged paperwork, the fake notary stamps, the testimonies from neighbors and potential buyers, it all pointed directly at him. But here's where it got even more dramatic. Instead of admitting guilt, he lashed out. He claimed he was being targeted, that I had fabricated evidence to frame him, that the entire community was against him out of jealousy. It was desperate, pathetic, and frankly insulting. But desperation is what you expect from someone watching their empire collapse. The police didn't buy his excuses. They continued building their case, preparing for formal charges. Still, the process was slow, and the president was released temporarily while the investigation wrapped up. That's when the true chaos hit the neighborhood. He started knocking on doors, trying to rally support, spinning wild stories about how I was trying to destroy him. He called emergency HOA meetings, shouting about conspiracies, claiming the police were corrupt and neighbors were out to get him. Some residents believed him, blinded by years of trusting his authority. Others saw through the act and kept their distance. For me, it was nerve-wracking. Every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me. Every car that slowed near my driveway made my stomach drop. I knew I had the truth on my side, but fighting someone so deeply entrenched in the community felt like going to war with a dictator. And yet, despite the noise, the investigation pushed forward. Piece by piece, the case against him grew stronger, and the day was approaching when the police would make their move. Not just questioning this time, but a full arrest. I'll never forget the night before it happened. The neighborhood was tense, silent in a way I'd never experienced before. It felt like everyone knew the end was near, like the walls were closing in on him. And they were. Because the next morning, flashing lights filled the street. Police cars lined up outside the HOA office. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks, whispering, gasping, watching history unfold. And at the center of it all was the president, standing on the steps with his hands cuffed behind his back, shouting about his innocence as officers led him away. It was surreal. The man who had tried to steal my property, who thought he could manipulate everyone around him, was now being marched out of his own office in front of the entire neighborhood. But even as I watched him disappear into the back of a police car, I knew this wasn't the end. Arrests are dramatic, but they're only the beginning of the real battle, the courtroom, and if the investigation had been explosive, the trial was going to be nuclear. Because not only was the president facing charges, he was about to have every dirty secret dragged into the open. And for a man who had built his power on fear and control, nothing could be more devastating. If the arrest was the crack that shattered the facade, the trial was the hammer that smashed it to pieces. For years, the HOA president had built an image of control, authority, and untouchable power. But once those courtroom doors opened, all of it unraveled under the weight of evidence, testimony, and truth. The courtroom was packed the day the trial began. Neighbors filled the benches, reporters hovered near the doors, and the president sat at the defense table, no longer dressed in the sharp suits that once made him look invincible. Now he looked smaller, cornered, and desperate. His eyes darted across the room as if searching for someone, anyone, to stand up for him. But there was no one left. The very community he claimed to represent had turned against him. The prosecution wasted no time laying out the charges: multiple counts of fraud, forgery, attempted theft of property, and abuse of authority. They presented the photographs I had taken of the forged documents, the fake notarization stamps, and the testimonies of neighbors who had seen him parading potential buyers around my property. They showed evidence of other forged files uncovered during the police raid, proof that this wasn't a one-time mistake, but a repeated scheme designed to exploit homeowners. Every piece of evidence hit like a hammer blow. Each forged document, each fraudulent signature, each neighbor's testimony stacked against him until the case became undeniable. The defense tried everything to spin the story. They claimed the documents had been planted. They argued the notary stamps could have been forged by someone else. They painted me as a troublemaker with a vendetta, accusing me of targeting the president because of personal disagreements. But it all fell apart under scrutiny. For every excuse, there was solid evidence that dismantled it. For every attempt to redirect blame, there was a witness to set the record straight. And then came the moment that sealed his fate. The prosecutors presented an audio recording obtained during the investigation, a conversation between the president and a potential buyer, where he bragged about having backdoor access to property sales, claiming he could push through ownership transfers without the owners even knowing. His voice was clear, confident, and damning. It was the final nail in the coffin. As the recording played, you could feel the air leave the room. The neighbors who once feared him now looked at him with disgust. The jury leaned in, expressions hardening. And the president? His face drained of color. For the first time, he looked like a man who realized his kingdom of lies had finally collapsed. The trial stretched on for days, but the outcome was obvious from the start. Every shred of evidence, every witness, every document pointed to one truth. He was guilty, and when the verdict was read, the weight of justice crashed down. Guilty, on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Some neighbors gasped in shock, others whispered in disbelief, and a few even clapped quietly, relieved that justice had finally been served. I sat there in silence, my heart pounding, as the words echoed in my ears. Guilty. The man who had tried to steal my home, who had used fear and fraud to manipulate the community, was finally held accountable. But the real blow came during sentencing. The judge, stern and unwavering, laid out the punishment. Years in prison for fraud and forgery, heavy fines to repay the damages caused, permanent removal from any position of authority within an HOA or community board. His career, his reputation, his freedom, all gone in an instant. As officers escorted him out of the courtroom in handcuffs, the once powerful president shouted, insisting it was a conspiracy, that he'd been framed, that justice had failed him. But his words fell flat. Nobody believed him anymore. The mask was gone, and all that remained was a fraud exposed. For the community, it was like a dark cloud had finally lifted. The fear, the intimidation, the constant feeling of being under the thumb of someone corrupt. It was over. Neighbors began speaking openly again, walking with lighter steps, finally free from the shadow he had cast for so long. For me, the victory was bittersweet. I had protected my home, yes. I had exposed a criminal, yes. But the stress, the sleepless nights, the endless fear, it had taken its toll. Still, standing outside the courthouse that day, watching the cameras capture the disgraced president being loaded into a police van, I felt a deep sense of closure. The battle was over. Justice had been served. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood began to heal. A new board was elected, this time with transparency and honesty at the forefront. Residents who had once been divided came together, united by the shared experience of surviving his reign of corruption. My property remained mine, safe and secure, no longer under the shadow of fraudulent hands. Looking back, it still feels surreal to think that one man's greed could nearly cost me everything. And yet, with perseverance and evidence, the truth prevailed. It's a reminder that no one is above the law, not even the people who pretend to hold power over us, especially not them. And that HOA president? The man who thought he could sell my home behind my back, profit off my hard work, and walk away untouchable. He didn't just lose his position, he lost everything. Now, he sits behind bars, trading his luxury office for a prison cell, his authority stripped away, his freedom gone. And while he may have thought he could outsmart the system, in the end, justice caught up with him. For me, it's not just a story about fraud. It's a story about standing up when someone tries to take what's yours. It's about refusing to be silenced, refusing to be intimidated, and refusing to let corruption win. And for every neighbor who ever felt powerless against the HOA, this ending proved one thing loud and clear. The fight can be won. Because in the end, the truth doesn't just set you free, it puts the guilty exactly where they belong.